The grand concourse of Axista Station was the kind of place that made Cale Vasquez feel very small. The ceiling rose so high above him that clouds actually formed near the top, little wisps of moisture caught in the station's artificial atmosphere. Thousands of beings moved through the enormous hall, creatures with scales, with feathers, with too many eyes or no eyes at all. Some floated, some crawled, some walked on legs that bent the wrong way. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, one 19-year-old human boy stood in a borrowed suit, holding a datapad with shaking hands. Cale was not supposed to be here. He was a junior trade attaché, the lowest rank in the small human diplomatic team stationed on Axista. His job was to organize files, translate documents, and stay out of the way. But tonight was different. Tonight was the multi-species cultural exchange banquet, and the senior diplomat who was supposed to give the human presentation had caught a respiratory infection from a Brevian air filter. So the task had fallen to Cale, the youngest, the quietest, the one who walked with a limp from a bone that had healed badly when he was 12. He had spent 3 days preparing his speech. It was about human folklore, about the old stories people on Earth told each other around fires, about heroes who were not the strongest but the most stubborn. He thought it was beautiful. He hoped the aliens would think so too. They did not. When Cale finished speaking, the hall gave him a polite silence that was worse than laughter. A few delegates from the Olivari delegation blinked their 6 eyes in what might have been appreciation. The rest simply turned back to their drinks and conversations, as if a piece of furniture had briefly made noise and then stopped. Cale stepped down from the small platform and moved toward the edge of the hall, trying to disappear. His face was warm. His hands were still shaking, but he told himself it was fine. He had done his job. He had represented Earth. That was enough. It was not enough for Commander Drael Vorik. Cale saw him coming from across the hall. It was impossible not to. Drael was nearly 7 feet tall, a Thaltsari officer built like a nightmare. His species looked like someone had taken the worst parts of an insect and the worst parts of a reptile and combined them into something that moved with terrible grace. He had 4 arms, each one ending in clawed hands that could crush stone. His head was crowned with a bioluminescent crest that glowed a slow, confident blue. He wore the dark ceremonial armor of the Thaltsari military, and the crowd parted for him the way water parts for a blade. 2 officers flanked him. Sisik, who was thin and cruel-looking with a crest that flickered yellow, and Javan, who was broader and duller, the kind of soldier who laughed at whatever his commander laughed at. They stopped directly in front of Cale. "Human," Drael said. His voice was deep and had a clicking quality beneath it, like stones grinding together. He spoke in the common trade language, but slowly, the way someone speaks to a child. "That was your presentation, yes, about your world." Cale straightened up as much as he could. The top of his head barely reached Drael's chest. "Yes, Commander, I spoke about our cultural traditions." "Fascinating," Drael said, and the word dripped with amusement. "Tell me, on your world the gravity is heavy, yes, much heavier than standard." "About 1.4 times galactic standard," Cale said carefully. "And the air, it is thick with oxygen, a reactive corrosive gas. 21% of our atmosphere, yes. And your world has, what do they call them? Hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, predators in every environment." Drael leaned down slightly. His crest pulsed brighter. "Your planet is classified as a Class 7 Deathworld, the 7th highest danger rating in the Galactic Registry." Cale felt the crowd beginning to gather. Aliens from several species had turned to watch. He swallowed. "That is correct." Drael straightened and looked at his officers. "A Class 7 Deathworld," he repeated, louder now, clearly performing for the audience. "And yet look at this." He gestured at Cale with one of his 4 arms, a sweeping motion that took in all of him. "This is what that terrible world produces. This small, soft, limping creature who tells stories about campfires." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not all of it was cruel. Some aliens simply found the contrast genuinely funny, but enough of it was cruel, enough of it had teeth. Kale's datapad was in his right hand. Drayle reached down and plucked it away with casual ease, the way someone might take a toy from a child. He held it up, examined it, and then closed his fist. The datapad cracked, then crumbled, then fell to the floor in pieces. "Fragile," Drayle said, "like everything from your world." Kale stared at the broken pieces on the floor. 3 days of work, his notes, his translations, gone. "Commander," he said quietly, "I would ask that you—" He never finished. Drayle's lower right hand shot out and grabbed Kale by the front of his suit. The Thaltsari lifted him off the ground with one arm, holding him up like a specimen. Kale's feet dangled. His limp leg hung uselessly. The crowd pressed closer. "This," Drayle announced, turning so everyone could see, "is a Deathworld." He let the word hang in the air, soaking in the absurdity of it. "This is what crawled off the poisonous rock. Soft skin, weak bones, it cannot even walk properly." He shook Kale slightly and Kale's teeth rattled. "Tell me, little human, does your world truly deserve that classification, or was it a clerical error?" The laughter was louder now. Jovan was making a wet, hissing sound that passed for Thaltsari amusement. Sissek's crest flickered rapidly with delight. Kale said nothing. There was nothing to say. He hung in the alien's grip and looked out at the crowd, hundreds of faces from dozens of species, and not one of them moved to help. Station security stood at the edges of the hall, watching, doing nothing. The Thaltsari were too important, too powerful, too useful to offend. Drayle held him for 5 more seconds. Then he opened his hand and let Kale drop. The boy hit the floor hard, his bad leg buckling under him. He caught himself on his hands and knees, and for a moment he stayed there, staring at the polished floor, at the reflection of all those alien faces looking down at him. His diplomatic colleagues rushed forward and pulled him to his feet. Someone was saying something about filing a formal complaint. Someone else was saying it would do no good. Kale let them guide him away. He did not cry. He did not speak. But something behind his eyes had changed, something quiet and deep had cracked, like a bone that would never heal straight. The crowd dispersed. The banquet continued. Drayle Vorik returned to his officers and accepted a drink, already telling the story again with grander gestures and bigger laughs. In a shadowed corner of the hall, a small creature watched everything. It was a brevian, an insect-like being no larger than a human child, with multifaceted eyes that missed nothing and a mind built for information. It had recorded the entire incident on a device hidden in its thorax. Now it turned away and moved silently toward a communication terminal. The message it sent was short. It traveled across subspace, bouncing through relay stations, cutting through the empty dark between stars. It found its way to a battered freighter called the Carrion Wind, currently moving through the most dangerous shipping lane in the sector. The message said, "Someone should tell the sister." The Vashti corridor was the kind of place where ships went missing and nobody asked questions. It stretched across 4 star systems that no government wanted to claim, filled with asteroid fields, dead stations, and the kind of silence that made even experienced spacers check their weapons twice. Pirates operated freely here. Raiders hit cargo ships and vanished into the dust clouds before anyone could respond. Lyra Vasquez had been living in this corridor for 3 weeks. She sat in the cargo hold of the Carrion Wind, a human freighter that looked like it had been repaired with tape and stubbornness. The ship was carrying medical supplies to a mining colony on the far side of the corridor, antibiotics, surgical tools, blood synthesizers. Things that people needed to stay alive. Things that pirates could sell for a fortune on the black market. That was why the crew had hired Lyra. She was 26 years old, lean and hard in the way that people get when they have spent years doing difficult things in difficult places. Her dark hair was cut short. A pale scar ran from her left temple to her jaw. Her left arm, from the elbow down, was cybernetic, a military-grade prosthetic sheathed in matte black casing. stronger than bone and faster than muscle. She had lost the original arm on a planet called Rithais 4 during a job that she did not talk about. The people who had been there did talk about it, though. They talked about it in whispers, and they called her La Parka, the Reaper. The alien crew of the Carrion Wind was afraid of her. Not because she was cruel, she was quiet, professional, and polite. They were afraid because they had seen what she could do during the pirate attack on day 9 of the journey. 3 raiders had breached the cargo hold. Lyra had dealt with all 3 in under 40 seconds, moving through the dark with a calm efficiency that made the ship's Gorvali captain physically ill to watch. Gorvali had excellent night vision. He had seen everything. After that, the crew gave Lyra a wide space and did not complain. She was cleaning her weapon in the cargo hold when her communicator buzzed. It was a message from a Brevian broker she had worked with once, years ago, on an information job. She did not know the Brevian well. She opened the message mostly out of curiosity. There was a short text, and there was a video. Lyra watched the video once. It showed a banquet hall, aliens standing in a circle, a tall Thaltsari officer holding a small human boy off the ground by his shirt. The boy's legs hung in the air. One of them was thinner than the other, a leg that had been broken once and healed at an angle. Lyra knew that leg. She had carried the boy who owned it on her back when he was 12 years old, running through a hospital corridor on Earth, screaming for a doctor. The boy was Kale, her brother, her only family. She watched the video a second time. On the screen, the Thaltsari shook Kale like a doll and the crowd laughed. On the screen, Kale fell to the floor and no one helped him up. Lyra's face did not change. Her breathing did not change. But her cybernetic hand resting on the armrest of her chair slowly tightened. The metal groaned. The armrest cracked. Then it crumbled into pieces under her fingers. She closed the video and stood up. The contract was supposed to take another 5 days. Lyra finished it in 2. She did not sleep for the final 40 hours. When a second wave of pirates hit the ship in the dead zone between systems, she moved through them so fast that the Gorvali captain later told other captains that the human woman had not even seemed angry. She had just seemed focused, like someone who had somewhere very important to be and was annoyed by the delay. The Carrion Wind reached its destination ahead of schedule. The crew paid Lyra and thanked her nervously. She took the money, packed her single duffel bag, and booked the first available transport to Axistar Station. The journey took 4 days. Lyra spent every hour of it preparing. She pulled up everything she could find about Commander Drael Vorik. His military service record 32 years in the Thaltsari fleet. His combat decorations, 11 confirmed kills in sanctioned duels. His political connections. He was the nephew of a Thaltsari council elder, which explained why he could do whatever he wanted on a neutral station without consequences. He was powerful, experienced, and untouchable. Lyra did not care about any of that. She cared about one thing, the Thaltsari Honor Code. She found it in an old diplomatic database, a detailed account of Thaltsari martial traditions. The Thaltsari were warriors above all else, and their entire society was built around concepts of honor, strength, and dominance. But even warriors had rules, and the rules had a gap. It was called the Kethvarin, the right of retribution. If a Thaltsari officer publicly shamed a member of another species, a blood relative of the shamed individual could challenge that officer to single combat. The challenge had to be made in the Thaltsari language, using the correct formal address, citing specific witnesses and the nature of the offense. If done correctly, the challenged officer could not refuse without being marked as a coward, a fate worse than death in Thaltsari culture. Lyra read the requirements 7 times. She memorized the formal phrases. She practiced the pronunciation until the harsh, clicking syllables of the Thaltsari language felt natural on her tongue. She studied Thaltsari combat styles, their anatomy, their weaknesses. She made notes. She made plans. Back on Axistar, Kale was not making plans. He was surviving. He still went to work every day. He still translated documents and organized files. He still smiled at the other delegates when they passed him in the corridors. But the smile did not reach his eyes anymore. He ate his meals alone. He stopped attending the cultural events that he used to love. When other humans on the station tried to talk to him about what had happened, he changed the subject. The formal complaint his delegation filed was rejected within a day. The station administration expressed regret but explained that Commander Vorik's actions, while unfortunate, did not technically violate any station regulations. Physical contact during social events fell into a gray area. The Thaltsari delegation called it a misunderstanding. They suggested that humans were perhaps too sensitive for galactic society. Drael Vorik, meanwhile, had turned the incident into his favorite story. He told it at dinners. He told it at briefings. He told it in the officers' lounge, each time making Kale a little smaller, a little more pathetic, a little more funny. His officers laughed every time. Other species began repeating the story too. It spread through the station like a virus. The human boy who got picked up like a child. The Deathworlder who could not even stand on his own 2 feet. Kale heard the whispers. He kept walking. He kept working. He kept his mouth shut. But at night, alone in his quarters, he sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the wall and wondered if coming to the stars had been a mistake. Then, on a Tuesday morning by Earth's calendar, a ship docked at Axistar Station. Lyra stepped off the transport and onto the main docking platform. She wore worn combat pants, heavy boots, and a dark jacket that did not quite hide the cybernetic arm underneath. Her duffel bag hung over one shoulder. Her eyes moved across the docking bay with the slow, careful sweep of someone who was always looking for exits and threats. The Brevian broker was waiting for her near the customs gate. It was small enough to stand on the railing, its multifaceted eyes catching the light. "The commander is in the officers' lounge," the Brevian said, its mandibles clicking softly. "Upper level, east wing. Shall I arrange a formal audience?" Lyra walked past the Brevian without slowing down. Her boots made a steady, even sound on the metal floor. "No need," she said. "I will introduce myself." The Thaltsari officers' lounge was on the upper east wing of Axistar Station, behind a set of heavy doors made from dark metal that had been carved with symbols of rank and conquest. No human had ever entered that room uninvited. No human had ever had a reason to. The lounge was Thaltsari territory, not officially, but in the way that a predator's den belongs to the predator. You did not walk in unless you were invited, and you were never invited. Lyra Vasquez walked in anyway. The doors were not locked. The Thaltsari did not believe in locks. Locks were for species that feared intrusion. The Thaltsari feared nothing, or at least that was what they told themselves. Lyra pushed the doors open with one hand and stepped inside. The room was large and dim, lit by the soft bioluminescent glow of Thaltsari lighting fixtures that pulsed like slow heartbeats. The walls were lined with weapons, curved blades, serrated spears, things that had no human name but were clearly designed to cause terrible damage. A dozen Thaltsari officers sat or stood around the room, drinking from tall vessels and speaking in the low, clicking tones of their language. They were all tall. They were all armed. They were all dangerous. Every single one of them turned to look at the human woman standing in their doorway. Lyra was 5 feet 7 inches tall. She weighed 140 pounds. In this room, she was the smallest living thing by a significant margin. She stood in the doorway and let them look at her. She did not fidget. She did not smile. She simply waited until the room was completely silent. Then she spoke in Thaltsari. The effect was immediate and visible. Several officers straightened in their seats. One dropped his drink. The language that came out of Lyra's mouth was not the broken, clumsy Thaltsari that translation software produced. It was fluent. It was precise. It carried the correct intonation patterns, the proper clicks and stops, the formal register that Thaltsari used only in matters of military protocol. Learning to speak Thaltsari properly took most non-Thaltsari species years. It required a vocal flexibility that many species simply did not possess. Humans, with their oddly versatile throats and tongues, were among the few who could manage it, but almost none ever bothered. Lyra had learned it in 4 days on a freighter. She had practiced until her throat ached and her jaw was sore. She had gotten it right because getting it right was the only option. "I address Commander Drail Vorik," she said in Thaltsari, her voice steady and clear, "holder of the Crest of Valor, officer of the 7th Fleet, blood of Elder Counselor Thren Vorik. I address him by his full name and rank, as is required by tradition." Drail Vorik was sitting in a large chair at the center of the room, a drink in one of his 4 hands. His bioluminescent crest, which had been glowing a relaxed blue, shifted to a brighter shade. He looked at Lyra with what might have been curiosity. He was not used to being surprised. "A human," he said, "speaking our language in our lounge." He tilted his head. "You are either very brave or very stupid." "I am the blood sister of Kale Vasquez," Lyra continued, still in formal Thaltsari, still following the script she had memorized. "Junior trade attaché of the human delegation on Axistar Station. 12 days ago in the Grand Concourse during the multi-species cultural exchange banquet, you laid hands upon my brother. You lifted him from the ground in front of 312 witnesses. You destroyed his property. You called him weak. You called him fragile. You invited others to laugh at his shame." The room had gone very still. Even the ambient lighting seemed to dim. "Under Article 9 of the Thaltsari Code of Martial Honor," Lyra said, "when a Thaltsari officer of command rank or above brings public shame upon a member of another species through physical dominance and verbal degradation, the bloodkin of the shamed individual may invoke the Kethvarin, the right of retribution, and demand satisfaction through single combat." She paused, let the words settle. "I invoke the Kethvarin," she said. "I demand satisfaction. I challenge you, Commander Drail Vorik, to answer for what you did to my brother." Silence, absolute ringing silence. Then Sisek, the thin officer with the yellow crest, stood up sharply. "This is absurd," he hissed. "A human cannot invoke the Kethvarin. It is beneath the commander to—" "Article 9 does not restrict the right by species," Lyra cut in, still in flawless Thaltsari. "It states that any bloodkin of any species may invoke the challenge, provided the formal requirements are met. I have met them. I have named the offense. I have named the witnesses. I have addressed the commander by his full rank and title. The invocation is valid." She looked directly at Drail. "Unless the commander wishes to refuse. Under Article 12, refusal of a properly invoked Kethvarin marks the refusing party as," she used the Thaltsari word, a harsh, clicking sound that carried a weight of meaning, "one who fears the blade, a coward." Drail's crest flared bright orange, the color of fury. His 4 hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Jorvan and Sisek both started speaking at once, urging him to find a way out, to dismiss the challenge on a technicality. But there was no technicality. Lyra had done the work. She had followed every rule, spoken every word, satisfied every requirement. The challenge was legal, formal, and binding, and it had been made in front of a room full of Thaltsari officers. Refusing now would follow Drail for the rest of his career. It would follow him into history. His name would be spoken with contempt by every Thaltsari who heard the story. He stood up slowly. He was enormous. Standing, with his crest raised, he seemed to fill the room. "I accept," he said. His voice was calm, but his crest burned. "I set the terms. Bladed weapons, close quarters, no ranged weapons, no armor, the traditional way." He paused and looked down at Lyra with something that might have been pity. "I choose the Vashra." The Vashra was a Thaltsari dueling blade, heavy, curved, designed to be wielded in pairs by a 4-armed fighter. It required immense strength to swing and even more skill to control. For a 2-armed human, it was essentially a death sentence. "Agreed," Lyra said without hesitation. "I will bring my own blade." Word of the challenge spread through Axistar Station like fire. Within hours, every species on the station knew. The Thaltsari Officers' Lounge incident was discussed in every corridor, every bar, every trading post. Betting pools opened almost immediately. The odds were 40-1 against the human. Some bookmakers refused to take bets at all. They considered it a foregone conclusion. Station Administrator Jean Morath, an elderly Olivari with 6 eyes and a reputation for careful diplomacy, called both parties to a meeting. The Olivari was distressed. Duels on the station were rare and usually involved members of the same species. This was unprecedented. "I must urge both parties to seek an alternative resolution," Jean Morath said, blinking rapidly. "Surely there is a diplomatic." "The Kethvarin has been invoked and accepted," Drayle said flatly. "It is not a matter for diplomats." Lyra said nothing. She simply sat in her chair with her hands folded and waited for the meeting to end. The administrator had no legal authority to stop a properly sanctioned honor duel. The meeting ended quickly. That night, Cale found his sister. He came to her temporary quarters, a small room near the human section of the station. He was pale. His hands were shaking. He had heard everything. "You cannot do this," he said. He was trying to keep his voice steady and failing. "Lyra, he is a trained warrior. He has killed people in these duels, 11 people. He has 4 arms and 30 years of combat experience. You cannot." "Sit down, Cale." He sat. Lyra crouched in front of him. She took his face in her hands, one hand warm flesh, the other cool metal, and she looked into his eyes. "He put his hands on you," she said quietly. "In front of everyone. He picked you up like you were nothing, and everyone just stood there and watched." "It does not matter," Cale whispered. "It was just words, just embarrassment. It is not worth dying over." "It matters," Lyra said. "It matters because you came out here to do something good. You learned their languages. You studied their cultures. You stood up in front of that room and tried to show them who we are. And he took that from you. He made you small so he could feel big." She let go of his face and stood up. "I am done watching people make you small." After Cale left, Lyra sat alone in her quarters for a long time. Then she opened her duffel bag and pulled out something wrapped in dark cloth. She unwrapped it carefully. It was a machete, human-made, simple steel. No decorations, no engravings, no technology. Just a blade and a handle designed for one purpose by a species that had been making tools like this for thousands of years. She picked up a whetstone and began to sharpen the edge. The sound filled the small room, a slow, rhythmic scraping that went on and on into the station's artificial night. 30 hours. That was how long she had until the arena. She kept sharpening. The Axistar ceremonial arena had not been used for a blood duel in 11 years. It sat in the deep core of the station, a domed chamber lined with tiered stone seating that rose upward like the inside of a bowl. The floor was white, a tradition borrowed from the Thaltsari, who believed that combat should leave a visible record. White showed blood beautifully. By the time the doors opened, every seat was taken. 5,000 beings from 37 species packed the arena, pressed shoulder to shoulder, tentacle to wing, crest to horn. They had come from every level of the station. Traders, diplomats, soldiers, engineers, cooks, dock workers. Word had traveled far and fast. A human woman had challenged a Thaltsari commander to a Kethvarin duel. Nobody wanted to miss it. The atmosphere was not tense. It was excited. The crowd buzzed with the particular energy of people who have come to watch something they already know the outcome of. This was not a contest. This was a spectacle. A small, 2-armed human female against a decorated Thaltsari warrior with 4 arms and 11 confirmed kills. The betting pools had settled at 43-1. Some species had placed bets not on whether the human would lose, but on how many seconds she would last. In the human section, a small cluster of seats in the upper tier, Cale Vasquez sat with his hands gripped together so tightly that his knuckles were white. The other human delegates surrounded him. Some had their eyes closed. One woman was moving her lips in what might have been a prayer. A young man next to Kale was holding a recording device, his hands trembling. Kale did not tremble. He sat perfectly still and stared at the white floor below and tried to remember how to breathe. A deep horn sounded, the Thaltsari signal for the beginning of a formal duel. The sound vibrated through the stone and into the bones of every being in the arena. The crowd fell silent. Commander Drael Vorik entered from the eastern gate. He was magnificent, and Kale hated himself for thinking so. Drael moved with the fluid, powerful grace of a creature that had never once in its life doubted its own strength. He was bare from the waist up, as tradition demanded. His body was covered in hard, scaled skin that shifted between dark green and black. His 4 arms hung at his sides, each one thick with muscle and ending in clawed hands. In his upper 2 hands he carried twin Vashra blades, curved, heavy weapons nearly 4 feet long, their edges gleaming under the arena lights. His bioluminescent crest blazed a deep, aggressive red. The crowd erupted. Thaltsari officers roared approval. Other species stamped and clicked and howled. Drael raised all 4 arms, blades glinting, and the arena shook. Then Lyra entered from the western gate. The noise died, not all at once but in a wave, as each section of the crowd got its first look at the human challenger and fell quiet. She was small. She was visibly, obviously small, dressed in a plain black sleeveless shirt and combat pants. No armor, no crest, no display. Her cybernetic left arm caught the light, but otherwise she looked like a maintenance worker who had wandered into the wrong room. In her right hand she carried the machete. It looked crude compared to the Vashra, a simple blade with a simple handle made of earth steel. It did not gleam. It did not curve elegantly. It was a tool, and it looked like a tool. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several Thaltsari officers laughed. In the betting section, someone adjusted the odds to 50-1. Lyra walked to the center of the arena and stopped. She looked up at Drael. He was a full 1.5 feet taller than her. His shadow fell over her completely. "You know," Drael said, speaking in the common trade language now so the whole arena could understand, "you could still withdraw. No one would blame you. Humans are not built for this." Lyra said nothing. She adjusted her grip on the machete and shifted her weight to the balls of her feet. The horn sounded again. The duel began. Drael attacked immediately. He came in fast, faster than something that large should have been able to move. His 4 arms worked in coordination, each Vashra tracing a different arc, creating a web of slashing steel that covered every angle. It was the Thaltsari style at its most devastating, overwhelming, inescapable, designed to end combat quickly by giving the opponent no room to think, no room to move, no room to exist. Lyra retreated. She moved backward in quick, controlled steps, her body low, her machete held close. She did not try to block the Vashra. Blocking a blow from a 4-armed Thaltsari with a single blade would shatter her arm, even the cybernetic one. Instead, she dodged. She ducked under sweeping cuts. She twisted away from thrusts. She gave ground steadily, circling the arena floor, always moving. The crowd roared its approval. To them, this was the beginning of the end. The human was running. Drael pressed harder, his crest blazed. His strikes came faster, heavier. A Vashra caught Lyra across the ribs, a slicing cut that opened her shirt and the skin beneath it. Red blood spilled down her side and dripped onto the white floor. The first mark of the duel. The crowd surged. Another cut found her thigh, a quick slash that would have crippled most species. Lyra stumbled, caught herself, and kept moving. Blood ran down her leg and left footprints on the white stone. In the human section, Kale made a sound that was not quite a word. Someone grabbed his arm to keep him in his seat. 3 minutes passed, then 5, then 7. Drael was still attacking, still pressing, but something had changed. His strikes, which had been precise and coordinated, were beginning to widen. His footwork, which had been fluid, showed the faintest hesitation. His crest, which had blazed red, was dimming toward orange. He was getting tired. The crowd noticed before Drail did. A murmur began in the lower tiers and spread upward. The Thaltsari in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Their officers exchanged glances. This was not right. Drail had fought duels that lasted 30 seconds, a minute at most. No opponent had ever survived this long. But the human was still moving, still circling, still bleeding and still moving at the same speed. Her breathing was heavy but controlled. Her eyes had not changed since the first second of the fight. They tracked Drail's arms, his footwork, his weight shifts, cataloging everything with a cold, mechanical patience that belonged to something that was not prey. This was the thing about humans that the galaxy had not yet learned. This was the thing that the classification, Deathworld species, actually meant. Humans were pursuit predators. On Earth, before technology, before civilization, before language, humans had hunted by following their prey across vast distances. Not by being faster, not by being stronger, but by refusing to stop. They walked and jogged and tracked across open plains under a burning sun while faster, stronger animals sprinted away from them, rested, sprinted again, rested again, and each time they stopped to rest, the human was a little closer. Hours would pass. The animal would run and stop, and the human would never stop, would never quit, would keep coming with that same steady pace until the animal's body simply gave out. Until its heart burst or its legs failed or it collapsed in the dust, and the human walked up to it, barely breathing hard, and finished it. Lyra was not fighting Drail, she was hunting him. At the 10-minute mark, Drail overextended. His lower left arm swung wide, just slightly too wide, and Lyra was inside the arc before the blade completed its path. Her machete moved in a single, sharp line and opened the tendons on his lower left wrist. The Vashra dropped from nerveless fingers and clattered on the stone. Drail bellowed and swung with his remaining 3 arms. Lyra was already gone, back outside his range, circling again. The crowd was silent now. The laughter had stopped. The betting terminals had gone dark. 1 minute later, she struck again. Drail threw a heavy crossbody slash with his upper right arm, a killing blow aimed at her neck. Lyra dropped under it, pivoted, and drove the machete into the joint where his upper right arm met his thorax. She had studied Thaltsari anatomy for hours on the freighter. She knew that the joint was reinforced with cartilage and bone. She also knew that behind the cartilage, buried deep in the muscle, there was a nerve cluster, a bundle of fibers that controlled the entire arm. She found it. The machete went in deep. The sound Drail made was something no one in the arena had ever heard from him. It was not a battle cry. It was a scream, raw, animal, involuntary. His upper right arm spasmed and went limp. The second Vashra fell. Lyra did not pull the machete back. She locked his remaining good arm with her cybernetic hand, braced her feet against the white floor, and twisted. The cybernetic arm whined with mechanical strain. The joint cracked. Then it broke. Then, with a sound that no one in the arena would ever forget, the arm tore free. Drail collapsed to his knees. His crest flickered wildly, blue, white, orange, dark blue, like a dying signal fire. He knelt on the white floor in a spreading pool of dark Thaltsari blood, and his remaining 2 arms hung at his sides, and he looked up at the human standing over him. Lyra stood there, covered in blood, hers and his, the machete in one hand, his arm in the other. Her breathing was heavy. Her body was cut and bleeding, but her eyes were exactly the same as they had been at the start. 5,000 beings held their breath. Drail spoke one word in his own language, a low, clicking sound barely audible. Keth, the formal Thaltsari word for yielding. The duel was over. Lyra looked at Drail for a long moment. Then she turned away from him and walked across the arena floor. Her boots left red footprints on the white stone. She walked until she reached the base of the stands, directly below the human section. She looked up. Kale was standing. Tears were running down his face, but he was standing. Lyra held her brother's gaze for 3 seconds. Then she dropped the arm on the ground. The silence lasted one more heartbeat. Then the human section erupted in a sound that echoed off the dome and filled the entire arena. A roar of voices, of fists pounding on seats, of a small group of people screaming for the woman who had come back for her brother. Other sections joined slowly, then faster. Species that had laughed at Kale 2 weeks ago were on their feet now, making whatever sounds their bodies could produce. The arena shook with it. Lyra did not raise her arms. She did not celebrate. She just stood there looking up at Kale, and for the first time since she had received the message on the carrion wind, something in her face softened. On the white floor behind her, the blood was already drying. In the days that followed, the dual Axistar station became a different place. Not loudly, not dramatically, it changed the way a river changes when a large stone is dropped into it. The water does not stop. It simply finds a new way to move. The recording of the fight spread across subspace within hours. Someone in the arena had captured the entire thing. From the moment Lyra entered the western gate to the moment she dropped the arm at the base of the human section. The file was copied, shared, reposted, and translated into 47 languages in the first day alone. By the end of the week, it had reached systems that most humans had never heard of. Species that had never met a human watched the small woman circle the enormous Thaltsari warrior. They watched her bleed. They watched her keep moving. They watched her win. The comments and reactions varied. Some called it disturbing. Some called it inspiring. A Gorvali military analyst published a 30-page assessment of human combat physiology, focusing on their cardiovascular endurance and the unusual efficiency of their cooling system. The ability to shed heat through skin moisture, which most species found disgusting, but which allowed humans to sustain physical effort far beyond what their size would suggest. A Brevian academic wrote an essay titled The Misclassification Problem that argued the galaxy had fundamentally misunderstood what a Deathworld species actually was. The essay's central point was simple. A species that survives a Class 7 planet does not do so by being fragile. It does so by being the most dangerous thing on that planet. The word Deathworlder did not stop being used, but it stopped being a joke. Commander Drael Vorik survived. The station's medical team, a mixed crew of Olivari surgeons and Thaltsari field medics, stabilized him within the hour. The damage was permanent. His upper right arm was gone. His lower left arm would never regain full function. For a Thaltsari whose entire identity was built around physical dominance and the use of all 4 limbs, this was worse than death in many ways. It was diminishment. Under Thaltsari military law, losing a Kethvarin duel carried severe consequences. The code did not care about circumstances or excuses. Defeat meant weakness, and weakness meant shame. Drael was stripped of his command of the Axistar contingent. His rank was reduced by 2 grades. His combat decorations were not revoked, but they were annotated, a quiet mark in his record that told anyone who looked that he had been beaten. His officers suffered by association. Sisik, who had laughed the loudest at the banquet, was transferred to a monitoring post on the outer rim, a cold, empty assignment that was one step above exile. Jorvan was sent back to the Thaltsari homeworld for reassignment to a training facility where he would spend the next several years teaching basic drills to recruits. Neither of them would speak publicly about Axistar again. Before Drael left the station, something happened that no one expected. Lyra was walking through a corridor near the medical wing. She had been treated for her wounds. The cut across her ribs had needed 17 stitches, and the gash on her thigh had gone deeper than she had realized during the fight. She was moving carefully, favoring her right side, when she turned a corner and found Drael standing there. He was alone. His remaining arms hung at his sides. The empty space where his upper right arm had been was covered in medical wrappings. His crest was dim, a faint, tired blue that barely lit the scales around it. They stood in the corridor and looked at each other. Two people who had tried to destroy each other in front of 5,000 witnesses, now standing in an empty hallway with nothing between them but air. Drayle spoke first. His voice was quieter than Lyra had ever heard it. "Your brother," he said. "At the banquet, he spoke our language." Lyra said nothing. She watched him the way she had watched him in the arena, with patience and without mercy. "He spoke it well," Drayle continued. "The formal register, the old phrases, he had studied." A pause. His crest flickered once. "I should have listened to what he was saying instead of using him to entertain my officers." It was not an apology. The Thaltsari did not have a word for apology, not in the way humans understood it. But it was an acknowledgement, a statement from a warrior that he had misjudged a situation, that he had mistaken gentleness for weakness, and that the mistake had cost him everything. Lyra looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once, a small, precise movement that carried more weight than any words could have. Drayle walked past her. They did not speak again. Cael Vasquez returned to work 3 days after the duel. He walked into the diplomatic offices at his usual time, sat at his usual desk, and began translating a trade document from Olivari into standard human English. His colleagues watched him carefully, waiting for something, for anger, for triumph, for some visible change. There was a change, but it was not what they expected. Cael was not louder. He was not harder. He did not swagger or boast or tell war stories about his sister. He was the same quiet, gentle person he had always been. He still smiled. He still spoke softly. He still took extra time to learn the correct pronunciation of alien names. He still asked questions about other species' cultures with genuine curiosity. But there was a steadiness to him now that had not been there before, a weight in his posture, a calm in his eyes that made people take him more seriously. He moved through the station's corridors without hesitation. He attended cultural events again. He gave another presentation, this one about human music, and the room listened with a quality of attention that was completely different from before. Alien delegates who had previously ignored him began approaching. A Gorvali trade representative asked him about human endurance training. An Olivari cultural attaché invited him to a private dinner to discuss human family structures. A young Brevian student asked him to help her learn human English, and Cael spent 3 hours patiently teaching her the difference between there, and there, and there. He was not respected because his sister was dangerous. He was respected because people had finally looked closely enough to see what had been there all along, a young man who had crawled off a Deathworld not with claws and armor, but with kindness and patience and a stubborn desire to understand everyone he met. The galaxy was not used to that combination. It unsettled them. It impressed them. It made them pay attention. Lyra stayed on Axistar for 1 week. She did not attend any official events. She did not give interviews to the dozens of information brokers who came knocking at her quarters. She did not accept the military commissions offered to her by representatives from 4 different species, each of them eager to add a proven Deathworld fighter to their ranks. Instead, she spent the week with her brother. They ate meals together in the small human cafeteria. They walked the station's observation deck and watched ships move through the starfield outside. They talked about home, about the old apartment on Earth where they had grown up, about the park where Cael had broken his leg climbing a tree, about the night Lyra had shipped out for her first off-world contract, and Cael had cried at the spaceport because he was afraid she would not come back. She always came back. At the end of the week, Lyra packed her duffel bag, put on her worn boots, and walked to the docking bay. Cael walked with her. At the gate, he hugged her. She held him tightly, carefully, because of her stitches, and pressed her forehead against his. "Be safe," he said. "Be brave," she said. She boarded a freighter bound for the outer sectors. A new contract, a new corridor, a new set of problems that needed solving by someone who did not quit. The ship pulled away from the station, and Cael watched it shrink into the stars until it was gone. The Brevian broker made a significant profit from the dual recording. It was the most downloaded file on 3 separate subspace networks for a month. When a reporter from a Gorvali news service asked the Brevian why it had sent the original message to Lyra, why it had gotten involved at all, the Brevian was quiet for a while. Its multifaceted eyes caught the light in a way that made it impossible to tell where it was looking. "I have studied many species," the Brevian said finally. "Thousands of cultures, millions of data points, behavioral patterns, response matrices. Every species responds to offense differently." Its mandibles clicked slowly, thoughtfully. "When a Thaltsari is wronged, they file a formal grievance. When an Olivari is wronged, they convene a council. When a Brevian is wronged, we sell the information to someone who will do something about it." The reporter waited. "When a human is wronged," the Brevian said, "you make sure it does not happen again." 3 months after the duel, Kale was at another banquet. The hall was the same grand concourse where everything had started, but the atmosphere was different now. The human delegation had a larger section. More species approached their table. The conversations were longer and more genuine. A young Thaltsari officer approached Kale's table. The officer was young, barely past its first molt, with a crest that had not yet settled into a fixed color. It moved hesitantly, its forearms held close to its body in what Kale recognized as the Thaltsari posture of respectful uncertainty. "Human Vasquez," the young Thaltsari said in halting but earnest standard trade language, "I wish to ask you about your world, about humans, about," it struggled for the word, "about how you are the way you are, how you survive what you survive and still." It gestured at Kale, at his slight frame, his gentle face, his calm eyes. "Still choose to be kind." Kale looked at the young officer for a moment. Then he smiled, not the polished diplomatic smile, but a real one, warm and open. "Would you like to sit down?" he said. "It is a long story." The young Thaltsari sat. Within minutes, others began to gather: an Olivari student, a Gorvali engineer, 2 Brevians who pretended they were not interested but kept edging closer. They formed a half-circle around Kale's table, a small cluster of very different beings drawn together by the simplest force in the universe: curiosity. Kale began to speak. He talked about Earth, about the oceans and the mountains and the storms, about the animals that hunted in the dark and the humans who learned to make fire to push the dark back, about the stories people told each other, stories about heroes who were not the strongest or the fastest, but who simply refused to give up, about a species that had been forged by a world that tried to kill them every single day, and instead of becoming monsters, they had become something stranger and more frightening than monsters. They had become kind, on purpose, despite everything, because of everything. The young Thaltsari listened. The Olivari listened. The Gorvali listened. Even the Brevian stopped pretending and listened. And this time the room did not laugh. This time everyone listened.